I have told this story to no one who asked for comfort. I tell it now because the archive requires it, because the inquiry board has filed its last question, and because I am the only one left who was there for all of it, from the first cell culture to the last burning corridor of Waldmann Station. My name is Henrik Voss. I was, until recently, Chief Xenobiologist for the Frontier Research Division of the Consolidated Sciences Directorate. I held 2 doctorates. I had published 41 peer-reviewed papers on alien tissue morphology and synthetic neural lattice integration. I was, by the assessment of everyone who mattered, the best in my field. I built the creature. I want to be clear about that, not partial credit, not shared responsibility. I drew the schematics, I sourced the tissue samples, I calibrated the reanimation array, and I gave the order to bring it online. Fritz Haller was my assistant, and he made one catastrophic error, but the error was made possible by the environment I created, the culture of speed and secrecy and don't ask questions that I had cultivated over 4 years on that station. If you want a villain, you are looking at him. I understand that now. I did not understand it then. But I am getting ahead of myself. That is the habit of a man who has spent too long explaining things to people who already know the ending. Let me go back to the beginning, the real beginning, not the press releases, not the grant applications, not the official mission statement that described our work as an initiative in xenobiological cataloging. Those were fictions for comfortable people in comfortable offices on a comfortable planet 300 million kilometers away. What we were doing, what I was doing, was trying to make something alive. Waldmann Station occupied a stable orbit above a world we called Threshold 7, a rocky body in the outer belt of a star system that had given us nothing useful for 11 years except for one thing: biological detritus. Not organisms, not even recognizable cellular structures in the conventional sense. What our survey drones recovered from the asteroid fields and the frozen plains of Threshold 7 were fragments, tissue analogs, the station biologists called them, microscopic clusters of material that behaved like organic matter, that responded to electrical stimulus, that consumed nutrients and produced waste, but that organized themselves according to no biological grammar we had ever encountered. They were not alive, not exactly, not in any way the law recognized or that the ethics board would have cared about, which was convenient for me at the time. What they were, in my assessment, was a vocabulary, a set of biological words waiting for someone to arrange them into a sentence. I had been on Waldmann Station for 4 years when the idea fully formed. It had been lurking at the edges of my work for 2 of those years. Every time I ran a cellular cohesion test and watched tissue analogs bind in ways that had no right to work, every time I mapped a neural lattice simulation against the alien material and found the 2 systems speaking a kind of pidgin language to each other. The alien matter was plastic, receptive. It didn't care that it wasn't supposed to integrate with human-derived synthetic neural frameworks. It just did. I wrote the proposal on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had secured internal funding. The ethics review was perfunctory. We had used the right language, cataloging and analysis, nothing that triggered the red flags around autonomous biosynthetic creation. Dr. Ilara Waldmann, the station director, looked at the budget line and the projected timeline and signed the authorization without looking up from her desk. "You'll be careful," she said. "Always," I told her. That was the last honest conversation I had with her. Fritz Haller had been my assistant for 6 of my 7 years with the directorate. He was not a brilliant man. He was not even, in the ordinary sense, a particularly gifted technician. What he was loyal and fast, and willing to work the hours I required without complaint. He had a nervous energy that I had long since stopped noticing, a habit of checking over his shoulder, of flinching at unexpected sounds, that I attributed to an anxious temperament and nothing more. He was afraid of me, I think. In retrospect, I think most of the people on that station were afraid of me in some quiet, manageable way. I did not cultivate warmth. I cultivated results. We began tissue harvesting in earnest in the third month of the project. The station's collection drones were reprogrammed to prioritize the largest and most morphologically complex analog clusters from the debris fields. We built a dedicated lab on the station's lower ring, Lab 9, sealed, climate-controlled, access restricted to myself and Fritz. I told Alara it was to prevent contamination. That was partially true. The work was extraordinary. I say that now with the full knowledge of what it cost, and I say it anyway, because I was never a man who confused sentiment with honesty. What we were seeing in those cultures was the most remarkable biological phenomenon in the history of human science. The alien tissue analogs did not merely accept synthetic neural architecture. They improved upon it. They routed signal pathways more efficiently. They generated new connection points that our models hadn't predicted. They healed damage in the lattice faster than any human-derived biological material could have managed. The thing I was building was going to be stronger than anything we had ever made, more resilient, more capable. I knew that, and I considered it a feature. The problem of cognition took me 18 months. I needed a cognitive framework, a neural template, not just the lattice architecture but the operational logic, the something that would give the creature a mind rather than simply a nervous system. I could not use a standard human cognitive map. The alien tissue's integration patterns were too different, and tests showed the resulting system would be incoherent, fragmented in ways that even I could not predict or manage. What I needed was an existing neural map that had already been shaped by stress, by adversarial conditions, by an organism that had operated under pressure and adapted. I needed a brain that had been forged by difficulty. This is the part I have the hardest time explaining to people who were not there, who did not understand the intoxication of that work, who cannot imagine what it feels like to stand at the edge of something no human being has ever done and feel the pull of it like gravity. I made a decision that I told myself was practical. I had access, through the Directorate's classified neuroscience archive, to a library of mapped human neural templates, cognitive snapshots taken from volunteers under various programs, anonymized and stored for research purposes. Among them was a set of templates flagged as anomalous, unusual signal density in the amygdala, elevated aggression markers, impulse control deficits of a significant degree. They had been flagged precisely because they were not considered suitable for the standard research applications the archive was designed to support. Fritz was the one who retrieved the archive package. He was supposed to pull a standard baseline template, the kind used for synthetic cognition research, clean, unremarkable, properly vetted. I had the package in my hands before I realized he had pulled the wrong one. The label read correctly on the outer casing. The flagging was on an interior data tag that I should have checked and did not. I have rehearsed over many years the moment in which I might have caught that error. There were several such moments. I did not take any of them. I was in a hurry. We were 6 weeks behind the internal schedule I had set, and I had told Alara we were on track, and the gap between those two facts was making me impatient in ways I did not acknowledge at the time. I loaded the template without running the full verification protocol. That was the error. Mine, not Fritz's, whatever he believed afterward and whatever he told the inquiry board. He pulled the wrong package. I loaded it without checking. The distinction matters to me even if it doesn't matter to the outcome. The reanimation event took place on a Thursday evening, Station Standard Time, during a violent electrical storm in the magnetosphere. Not the gothic drama of lightning and raised platforms that the old stories describe, but a functional procedure in a sealed laboratory, conducted under fluorescent light, with a reanimation array calibrated to deliver precisely the electromagnetic pulse frequency that our models indicated would trigger the alien tissue's activation cascade. I remember thinking, very clearly and without any particular poetry, that I was about to become the first human being to create a genuinely new form of life. The array fired, the reading spiked, and across the table the thing I had built opened its eyes. It did not look the way I had imagined it. I had imagined something clinical, a body, an organism, a research subject. What was lying on the table was a creature. It was large, larger than a human, because the alien tissue bulk had exceeded my projections by 20%, and I had accommodated that in the skeletal design. It was covered in a skin that was not quite the right color for anything I could name, a gray-greenish pallor that the alien biological material gave it, striated with the dark traces of the neural lattice running just below the surface like veins of graphite. Its hands were too large. Its face was flat and heavy, the features blunt, the brow pronounced, because I had built the skull to accommodate the expanded cranial volume that the neural integration required. But its eyes, when they opened, were not the eyes of a monster. They were searching, uncertain. They moved across the ceiling of Lab 9 with a kind of desperate curiosity that I had not anticipated and that, in that first moment, struck me as almost heartbreaking. It reached one hand upward, toward the bank of overhead lights. Then Fritz, who had been standing too close with a handheld diagnostic emitter, activated the device without warning. The electromagnetic pulse from the emitter hit the creature at point-blank range. The alien tissue, which was exquisitely sensitive to electromagnetic fields, I knew this. It was in every report I had written, contracted violently. The creature's hand jerked back. It made a sound I do not have a word for. Something between pain and rage, below the range of comfortable hearing, that I felt in my sternum before I processed it as sound. It looked at Fritz. I said very quietly, "Turn off the emitter, Fritz." He did not turn off the emitter. He was frightened. I could see that, and frightened men with handheld devices in their hands do not always respond to quiet instructions. He activated it again. The creature came off the table. What happened in the next 40 seconds required 3 subsequent reconstructions by the inquiry board, 2 of which I provided, and 1 of which came from station security footage that I had not known existed. I will not describe it in detail. Fritz survived. He survived with injuries that required 6 weeks of medical attention and left him with a pronounced tremor in his left hand that he carries to this day. The creature did not kill him, though it certainly could have. It broke his arm, fractured 2 ribs, and left him on the floor of Lab 9 before it moved to the sealed door, which it tested systematically for approximately 90 seconds before finding the manual override panel with a precision that should have been impossible for something that had been alive for less than 3 minutes. It opened the door and walked out into Waldmann Station. I stood in Lab 9 for a moment that felt much longer than it was, listening to the emergency klaxon begin its cycle, and tried to understand what I had done. Alara Waldmann came to Lab 9 within 4 minutes of the breach alarm. She was a tall woman, lean and deliberate, with the particular composure of someone who had spent 20 years managing crises at the edge of explored space. She looked at Fritz on the floor, at the overturned equipment, at the door standing open, and then she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. "Henrik," she said. "I can contain it," I said. She did not respond to that. She activated her comm unit and began issuing instructions to station security. Lockdown protocols, sector by sector, methodical and calm. I watched her and felt, for the first time, something I recognized after the fact as shame, a hot, disorienting sensation that I associated, imprecisely, with weakness. I had told her we were on track. I had told her we were being careful. "The neural template," I said. "There was an error. The cognitive framework I loaded, it wasn't the standard baseline. It was flagged material, elevated aggression markers. I didn't catch it in time." Alara looked at me. She said nothing for a long moment. "How large is it?" she said. "Approximately 2 meters 10, mass around 140 kilograms. The alien tissue gives it a regenerative capacity I can't fully quantify. Minor damage heals at a rate I've never seen in any biological system. It's strong, significantly beyond human baseline. Is it intelligent? I hesitated. The cognitive integration tests I ran before activation suggested functional intelligence in the range of yes. It's intelligent. The neural template was a high-density map. Whatever it is, it thinks. Ilara closed her eyes for approximately 2 seconds. When she opened them, she was already moving. We have 93 people on the station, she said. You're going to help me keep them alive. The creature did not move through Waldmann Station the way a simple animal would have. That was the first thing we learned, monitoring it through the security systems as it made its way through the lower ring and into the residential corridors. It did not thrash or smash indiscriminately. It moved with a kind of cautious deliberation, testing surfaces, examining equipment with its 2 large hands, stopping to study a wall panel or a conduit junction with what I can only describe as genuine interest. It was learning the station. Room by room, corridor by corridor, it was building a map. Security Chief Nora Ravel, who had served as a military enforcement officer for 12 years before joining the Directorate, assessed the footage and told Ilara that it was behaving tactically. It's not panicking, she said. It's oriented. It's looking for something. What? Ilara said. Ravel looked at me. Food, I said. Thermal regulation. Safety. I paused. It's doing what any living thing does when it finds itself in an unfamiliar environment. It's trying to survive. It put one of my people in the medical bay, Ravel said. She did not say it loudly. She said it the way a person says something they want to be understood. Fritz activated an electromagnetic emitter against it at point-blank range, I said. The alien tissue is acutely sensitive to. I know what Fritz did, Ravel said. I'm telling you what the creature did. We did not agree on much in those first hours. Ravel wanted to use the station's emergency containment systems, a series of electromagnetic barrier projectors that could, in theory, be used to herd the creature into a sealed compartment. I objected strenuously. The electromagnetic barriers would cause the alien tissue to react violently. We would not be containing the creature. We would be inducing pain in a confused and frightened being, and then trying to manage it while it responded to that pain. It's a biosynthetic organism with a criminal-grade neural template, Ravel said. It's alive, I said. That means something. It has to mean something. Ravel looked at me with the flat assessment of a person who has seen what human beings do to each other under pressure, and does not have the luxury of abstractions. It means something to me too, Dr. Voss, she said. There are 93 people on this station, and it means everything to me. Ilara made the decision. We would use a combination of environmental management and active monitoring, directing station personnel away from the creature's path, sealing certain corridors to guide its movement, buying time. Her goal was not to trap it. Her goal was to keep everyone alive long enough to find a solution that didn't require anyone to die. I did not deserve to be working alongside her. I know that now. At the time, I told myself it was because my knowledge of the creature was essential. That was true. It was also self-serving, and I let the truth of it crowd out the self-service, which is a very human way of living with oneself. The creature was alone on Waldmann Station for 6 hours before it found something that changed everything. Section 4C of the residential ring was the station's recreational and social commons. In the chaos of the lockdown, the evacuation of that section had been incomplete. A junior technician named Maria Scott, 22 years old, assigned to the atmospheric monitoring team, on Waldmann Station for the first time in her career, had taken shelter in the 4C observation lounge rather than reaching the secure muster point in her section. She had sealed the door and silenced her comm unit, believing the creature was between her and any exit, which the security footage confirms was correct. The creature found the lounge. It stood outside the sealed door for a long time, 19 minutes. According to the log, before the door's manual override succumbed to the same systematic pressure it had applied to Lab 9. When the door opened, Maria Scott was standing in the center of the room, backed against the observation window, looking at the thing I had built. She did not run. She told me afterward that she had decided, in the 19 minutes she had listened to it working on the door, that running was not going to be useful. What she had decided to do instead was talk to it. She was wrong about a great many things about the creature, its biology, its cognition, its emotional state. But she was right about one thing that I, with all my expertise, had not considered carefully enough. The neural template I had loaded was a human template. Whatever else the creature was, its mind had been built on the architecture of a human mind, and human minds respond to certain things. She talked to it. She showed it objects in the lounge, a coffee cup, a tablet computer, a small potted plant she had brought from Earth and kept alive for 7 months on Threshold 7's processed atmosphere. The creature watched her with the same searching intensity it had brought to the ceiling of Lab 9 in the first seconds of its life. When she held the plant out to it, it took the plant with extraordinary gentleness and held it in its massive hands, turning it, examining the small green leaves with the expression. I am using that word deliberately, because the alien tissue face was capable of expression, something else my models had not predicted, of something I cannot describe as anything but wonder. It handed the plant back. She named it. Not a clinical designation, a name. She called it Carlin, after a grandfather who had been a large, quiet man and had died the previous year. She told me this afterward, half apologetically, as if naming it had been an indulgence. I told her it had been the most intelligent decision made on Waldmann Station in the previous 24 hours. I was not being kind. I meant it. We watched all of this on the security feeds. Ravel, beside me, said nothing for a long time. It didn't hurt her, she said finally. No, I said. It could have. Yes. Ravel watched the feed. On the screen, Maria Scott was sitting on the floor of the lounge, and the creature called Carlin was sitting across from her, and they were sharing the small distance between them in a silence that looked, from the outside, almost companionable. What do you need to fix the neural template? Ravel said. That was the question I had been asking myself since the moment Carlin had come off the table, and the answer was not simple. The cognitive framework that Fritz had pulled from the Directorate archive, the flagged, high-aggression template, was now integrated throughout the creature's neural lattice. It was not a setting that could be changed. It was not a module that could be swapped. It was woven into the architecture of Carlin's mind at a level below what any surgical intervention could reach. What I could do, what I believed I could do, was supplement it. The alien tissue's plasticity meant that the neural lattice was still growing, still forming new connections. If I could introduce a structured electromagnetic pattern at the right frequency, targeted at the right regions of the lattice, I might be able to encourage the development of new pathways that would gradually, not immediately, not safely quickly, but gradually, balance the aggression-dominant architecture with something more stable. It was not a cure. It was therapy in the loosest possible sense. It required time, repetition, and cooperative proximity with the subject. The problem was that, to deliver the treatment, I needed to be in the room with Carlin. Absolutely not, Ravel said. He won't hurt me, Maria said. We both looked at her. She was sitting in the briefing room, still in her coverall from Section 4C, her hair loose, one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee. She was the calmest person in the room. You've known it for 4 hours, Ravel said. I know what I saw, Maria said. He handed the plant back to me. He could have kept it. I think he wanted to keep it. He handed it back. She paused. Something in him understands giving things back. Elara, who had been listening from the corner of the room, said, What's your confidence level, Henrik? I thought about the neural template, the aggression markers, the broken ribs and the fractured arm. I thought about Carlin standing outside Maria's door for 19 minutes, testing the override rather than forcing the door in the first 30 seconds, which it certainly could have. The aggression is real, I said. It's structural. I can't promise it won't express itself. But it expressed itself in Lab 9 because Fritz applied a pain stimulus at close range without warning repeatedly. The architecture responds to threat, if there's no threat. If, Ravel said. If, I said, yes. Ilara made another decision. Maria would make the initial contact. She already had whatever relationship existed between her and Carlin, and I was not going to pretend that didn't matter. I would accompany her. Ravel would have 2 security personnel at the far end of the corridor, outside sensor range of Carlin, with instructions not to approach under any circumstances unless the station emergency alarm was triggered. Any circumstances, Ilara said to Ravel, and the look between them carried more weight than the words. The walk to Section 4C felt very long. Maria walked beside me without speaking. I had a portable treatment array in a carry case, the smallest version I could configure, a flat emitter plate that looked, at a casual glance, like a tablet computer. I had spent 2 hours calibrating it for the alien tissue's electromagnetic sensitivity, trying to find the frequencies that would feel like a resting state rather than an alarm, the neurological equivalent of a low and steadying sound. "Are you frightened?" Maria asked me. "Yes," I said. She seemed satisfied with that. Carlin was in the lounge where she had left it. When we came through the door, it stood, the movement fast and defensive, shoulders drawing up, that below-hearing sound beginning at the edge of perception. I stopped moving. So did Maria. She held up her hands open and spoke Carlin's name in the same tone I had heard her use on the security feed. The sound stopped. It looked at me. I had the distinct and uncomfortable sensation of being assessed by something considerably more thorough than casual attention. The flat, heavy face and the searching eyes held me for a long moment, and then Carlin sat back down on the floor of the lounge, which is how I learned that it preferred the floor to the furniture, and has always seemed to me a reasonable preference for a being of its size. I sat on the floor as well. Maria sat between us. I activated the emitter at the lowest setting and the widest dispersal pattern, filling the room with a field so diffuse it was below the threshold of any instrument Carlin could detect directly. I was essentially filling the air with a very gentle, very specific electromagnetic frequency. I was doing something that, in purely technical terms, resembled playing soft music in a room where someone was trying to sleep. Carlin's shoulders, which had remained elevated and tense, dropped by approximately 10 degrees over the next 15 minutes. I considered that a beginning. We maintained those sessions for 9 days. I do not want to describe those 9 days as peaceful, because they were not. The station remained in a modified lockdown. Ilara spent 12 to 15 hours a day managing the concerns of 93 people who were sharing a confined habitat with something that had put a colleague in the medical bay, and that most of them had not seen and all of them feared. Ravel spent those same hours maintaining her security posture and trying to persuade Ilara that what I was doing was wishful thinking dressed up as science. She was not entirely wrong. I knew that. I held the knowledge of how incomplete my understanding of Carlin was, of how many variables I couldn't predict, and I held it the way you hold something heavy, constantly, consciously, without ever being able to put it down. But in that lounge, for 3 to 4 hours each session, something was happening that I had not designed and could not fully explain. Carlin was learning, not slowly, not tentatively, but with a hunger that was the most human thing about it. Maria brought it objects from across the station, a book with pictures, a set of engineering tools, food samples from the galley. It handled each one with the same focused attention, tasting, testing, turning the objects over in its large hands as if everything in the world was worth understanding. When Maria used a word it hadn't heard before, it repeated the sound back with a precision that was, at first, uncanny and then, gradually, just part of the grammar of those sessions. It did not speak in sentences, not in those 9 days, but by the 5th day it was using words, single words, deployed with surgical accuracy at moments when they were specifically applicable, and by the 8th day it had begun to combine them. On the 9th day it said, in a voice that was lower than any human voice, and had an overtone in it that came from the alien tissue in its vocal cords, 2 words that it directed at me. It said, "Why me?" Not a question, exactly, or a question that had been sitting at the back of something for 9 days and had finally found its way to the surface. I did not have an answer that was adequate. I told it the truth, that I had wanted to make something new, something that had never existed before, and that I had not been careful enough about what that cost. I told it that the error in its construction was mine, not its. I told it that the mind it had been given was not the mind I had intended for it, and that I was trying to correct that slowly, imperfectly, in the only way I knew. Carlin looked at me for a long time. Then it looked at the potted plant that Maria had brought back to the lounge and placed in the observation window, where the station's grow lights could reach it. It reached out and very carefully rotated the pot so that the plant was better positioned toward the light. I do not know what to make of that even now. I have thought about it for 3 years. I have no clinical explanation for why it did that in that moment in response to what I had said. I have only the memory of it, and the way it settled something in me that I had not known needed settling, some equation about what I had made and whether it was worth saving. Watching Carlin tend to that small, fragile plant with its enormous, damage-capable hands, I believed for the first time that it was. It was Fritz who ended it. I have reconstructed his reasoning. It is not complicated, and I do not think he was a bad man, which makes it harder in some ways than if he had been. He was frightened. He had been frightened since before the activation event, and the 6 broken bones had not helped, and he had been watching those lounge sessions from a secondary security feed that he had found, and that no one had thought to restrict his access to. He had watched for 9 days. He had watched me sitting on the floor of a lounge with the thing that had broken his arm, apparently reconciled to its existence, apparently making progress, apparently advocating for its continued presence on the station. Fritz had not reconciled. Fritz was never going to reconcile. He had stood in Lab 9 in the first moments of Carlin's life, and he had activated an electromagnetic emitter, and the creature had looked at him with those searching eyes, and then it had come off the table, and whatever Fritz had seen in those seconds had settled into him like a splinter and would not come out. He had access to the station's maintenance systems through his standard technician credentials. Waldmann Station's maintenance network controlled, among other things, the environmental regulators for each section, temperature, atmosphere, pressure. He had also, over the previous 4 years, developed an extensive working knowledge of the station's emergency systems, because that was part of a senior technician's responsibilities. He pulled the atmospheric regulator for Section 4C and shifted it to a setting that should not have been accessible from his credential level, but was, because of a network architecture shortcut that had been implemented during a cost reduction audit 3 years before and that no one had reviewed since. He flooded the section with a halon variant fire suppression compound. The intent, I believe, was not specifically to kill Carlin. The intent was to drive it out of Section 4C, in the panic and the atmospheric distress, toward the station's exterior maintenance corridors, where he had opened a series of vacuum-rated doors. The logic, if you can call it that, was that the creature would be driven toward the vacuum exposure, and that would end it cleanly from a distance, without anyone in the way. What actually happened was that the suppression compound triggered the alien tissue's alarm response before Carlin had any chance to orient, and it did not move toward the exterior corridors. It moved up, through the station's structural access shafts, into the mechanical spaces above the residential ring. And in those spaces there were 2 things. A cluster of atmospheric recycling equipment that used high-voltage electrical components, and 3 maintenance workers who had been in the middle of a scheduled repair, and who had not been evacuated because Fritz had not considered, or had not known, that they would be there. They survived. All 3 of them survived, which tells you something about Carlin. They survived because when it came through the access shaft and found them in its path, it moved around them rather than through them. In a confined space, in a pain-driven alarm state, with the aggression template that Fritz had inadvertently given it, it moved around 3 terrified human beings rather than through them. I do not know if it understood what it was doing. I do not know if it made a choice in any sense that philosophers would recognize as meaningful. I know what it did. But the electrical equipment it passed through on its way out of the mechanical space was not as fortunate. The damage triggered a fire suppression response in that section, and the fire suppression response flooded the mechanical space with the same compound Fritz had released in 4C, and the compound reached the atmosphere recycling equipment, and the recycling equipment, damaged, already compromised by the transit of a 140-kilogram biosynthetic organism, failed in a way that produced a fire. Waldmann Station is a pressurized habitat. Fire is one of the few things a pressurized habitat genuinely cannot accommodate. I am going to tell you what the next 4 hours were, briefly, because brevity is what I can offer. Those 4 hours have their own weight that does not need my elaboration. The fire started in the mechanical space at approximately 2 in the morning, station standard time. By the time the station's automatic suppression systems had been overwhelmed, and the emergency alarm had been escalated to a full evacuation status, the fire had spread through the access shaft network into 2 residential sections and the station's central communications hub. Alara managed the evacuation with a competence that I have never seen matched. 93 people, 3 escape vehicles, 2 hours and 40 minutes to get them loaded and away from the station before the structural integrity of the central hub became an active risk to docked vessels. She was the last person into the last escape vehicle. I know this because I watched her from the vehicle's external camera, and I have watched that footage many times since. Before she boarded, she looked back at the station. Waldmann Station was burning, not dramatically, not all at once, but with the precise and particular destruction of a fire in a controlled atmosphere, eating through compartments methodically, turning lights off one section at a time. She looked at it for 5 seconds. Then she got in the vehicle. I was not with her in that escape vehicle. I had not followed the evacuation route I had been assigned. I had gone back to find Carlin. I want to say that this was a heroic decision. It was not heroic. It was the decision of a man who understood, with a clarity that had been building for 9 days, that he had made something that was alive, and that deserved, at minimum, the same energy being spent on its survival as had been spent on its creation. It was also the decision of a man who understood that he was the only person on the station who knew where Carlin would go. It would go to the highest point it could reach. That was what the neural template predicted under threat, under fire, under the combined pressure of atmospheric distress and electromagnetic disruption from the burning systems. The architecture I had built would drive it upward, away from the confined spaces, away from the enclosed corridors, toward open air, toward sky, toward the observation levels at the top of the station's main body that had the widest clearances and the most light. I climbed through smoke and emergency lighting for 40 minutes. I was not in good physical condition for this. I am a researcher, not a field operative, and the smoke and the heat and the particulate in the air were doing things to my lungs that I noticed and cataloged and did not stop moving for. I carried the portable treatment array in its case, and I carried a rebreather mask, and I climbed. The station's main observation deck was, when I reached it, fully illuminated by the fire. The transparent panels that gave it its name were intact. Fire had not reached this level yet, and beyond them, Threshold 7 turned in its slow orbit, rust-red and gray and vast, and the star at the center of this system was rising above the curve of the planet, throwing long light across the observation deck. Carlin was standing at the far end of the deck, pressed against the observation panels. It was facing the view. I stood in the doorway for a moment, breathing through the rebreather mask, and looked at this thing I had built. It was lit by the rising star and by the glow of its own burning station. It was enormous and wrong and extraordinary. The alien tissue was showing stress responses, a darkening of the pallor, a tightening of the striations along the arms and neck, and it was trembling very slightly, a whole-body tremor that I recognized from the neural lattice models as the system managing overload. But it was not raging. It was not destroying. It was standing at the window, looking at a world it would never walk on, and it was very still. I walked across the observation deck and I sat down on the floor, and I took the portable treatment array out of its case, and I turned it on. The low-frequency field filled the observation deck. Carlin's trembling over the next 6 minutes slowed and stopped. It looked down at me. I looked up at it. The fire was somewhere below us in the station, working its patient way upward. We had perhaps 40 minutes. Waldmann, it said, the station's name which it had heard used hundreds of times, using it now as a question, asking me what was happening to the world it had been alive in for 9 days. It's burning, I said. I'm sorry, it's burning and I can't stop it. Carlin looked back out at the planet. Maria, it said. She's safe, I said. She's in an escape vehicle. She's going to be all right. It was quiet for a while. The fire light from below was growing. I had an escape route. I had mapped it on the way up, a maintenance corridor on the east side of the observation level that connected to an exterior docking clamp, where one of the station's small survey craft was still attached. Survey craft were rated for short-range vacuum transit. I could get us both to the escape vehicle cluster if the survey craft systems were still functional, and if we moved in the next 20 minutes. I stood up. I put the treatment array back in its case. I need you to come with me, I said to Carlin. It looked at me. I know you don't have any reason to trust me, I said. I know exactly how much reason you don't have. I'm asking anyway. The fire was louder now. I could feel heat rising through the deck plating. Carlin looked out at Threshold 7 one more time. I watched it look at the planet, at the only sky it had ever seen, with an expression I recognized, because I had seen it on the faces of researchers who look out at something vast and alien and feel, beneath the professional interest, the particular human ache of knowing they will never fully understand it. Then it turned from the window. It walked toward me, and it stopped, and it held out one large and damaged hand. I took it. We walked out of the burning station together. The survey craft was functional. The docking clamp released on the 3rd attempt. We cleared Waldmann Station's debris field at 4:27 Station Standard Time, and I raised the escape vehicle cluster on short-range comms, and Alara's voice came back to me through static and distance and everything that had happened in the last 18 hours, and she said, in a tone that told me she had not stopped working since the moment she got into that vehicle, I see you on radar, Henrik. Come in. Carlin sat in the co-pilot seat, which it did not fill correctly, and watched the stars through the survey craft's forward port. It did not speak. I did not speak either for a long time. When we were 2 kilometers out from the escape vehicle cluster, close enough that the docking sequence had already been initiated, Carlin said one thing. It said the plant. I thought about the small potted plant in the observation lounge window, oriented toward the grow lights. I thought about what it had cost Maria to keep that plant alive for 7 months in processed air, 300 million kilometers from the nearest garden. I told Carlin the truth. I told it the plant had not made it. It was quiet for the rest of the approach. The inquiry took 14 months. I testified 12 times. Fritz Haller was charged with endangerment, gross negligence, and unauthorized system access, and his trial took 6 months and produced a result that I was not asked my opinion of and would not have given clearly if I had been. Alara Waldmann's career survived. Mine did not, in any form that I would recognize as a career. The Consolidated Sciences Directorate revoked my credentials and stripped my published work of institutional affiliation, which is the academic equivalent of being erased. I did not contest it. Carlin was, after considerable legal and ethical argument that consumed 2 of those 14 months, classified as a protected entity under the Directorate's expanded xenobiological designation, a category that had previously been used only for naturally occurring alien organisms, but that a coalition of researchers, including several who had never met Carlin, argued persuasively should include artificially constructed life that demonstrated equivalent complexity. It was not rights, exactly. It was something newer and less certain than rights, which is perhaps appropriate for something newer and less certain than anything that had existed before. It lives, as far as I know, at a research station on the far side of the system, a smaller facility, quieter, with better electromagnetic shielding in the living quarters, and a section of the habitat that has been converted to a pressurized garden. Maria Scott is stationed there. She applied for the posting herself, before the inquiry was even completed. She sends me photographs occasionally. The garden is doing well. I do not do research anymore. I consult, sometimes, for organizations working in synthetic biology, and I turn down more requests than I accept, and I sleep, most nights, adequately. I think about Carlin more than I think about anything else from my previous life. I think about the neural template and the error, and what Carlin would have been with a different starting point. I think about what it was with the starting point it had, the searching eyes, the gentle hands on a fragile plant, the choice it made in a burning mechanical space to move around 3 human beings it had no reason to protect. I think about the moment it took my hand. There is a question that the inquiry board asked me in various forms over 12 sessions that I did not answer well at the time, whether I would do it again. I understand now what they were actually asking. They were asking whether the desire to make something new, something that had never existed, was strong enough in me to override everything else. The caution, the ethics, the weight of the lives I was responsible for, whether I had learned anything. The honest answer is not what anyone wanted to hear. The desire has not gone away. It is not the kind of thing that goes away. The hunger to understand, to create, to push the boundary of what is known out one more step into the dark, that is as much a part of me as anything that has my name on it. I do not think I am unusual in this. I think this is what human beings are, taken at the edge of their capacity. We look at the unknown and we reach for it before we have thought carefully enough about what reaching costs. What I know now that I did not know before, what Waldmann Station taught me at the cost of 9 days and a career, and a station full of frightened people and one creature that had no say in its own existence, is that what we reach for has its own kind of life, its own kind of claim on us. That the moment we make something that can suffer or wonder or tend a plant toward the light, we have taken on a debt that does not dissolve because the project is complete. What we make we are responsible for, all the way to the end, all the way through the burning. Carlin taught me that, not by explaining it, by being it. The star was rising over threshold 7 when we left the station, and the light came through the survey craft's forward port and fell across its face. And for a moment, one moment before the docking clamp engaged and the business of survival reasserted itself, it looked like nothing so much as a being watching a sunrise, which is, I have come to believe, one of the most human things there is. I made it, I owe it that at minimum. I will carry that for the rest of my life, which seems, at last, like the appropriate weight for a man of my particular history. There is a postscript to all of this that I did not include in my inquiry testimony, because it was not germane to the board's questions, and because I was not certain at the time that I fully understood it myself. On the survey craft, during the approach to the escape vehicle cluster, I ran a final diagnostic on the portable treatment array. The device logs every session in which it is activated, duration, frequency settings, dispersal pattern, estimated neural tissue response. It had been running sessions in Section 4C's observation lounge for 9 days, each session 3 to 4 hours long. The logs showed something I had not observed in real time. Over the course of those 9 days, the optimal treatment frequency had shifted. The target frequency that produced the maximal calming response in Carlin's alien tissue had moved, incrementally, session by session, in a direction I had not programmed and had not initiated. The tissue itself had been adjusting. The neural lattice had been remodeling. Not in response to my treatment. The treatment had been a nudge, a suggestion, a gentle electromagnetic argument. The lattice had been doing something far more substantial on its own, quietly, below the threshold of the monitoring instruments I had set up, reorganizing itself in the direction of stability. It was healing its own mind. I do not know how long it would have taken. I do not know what Carlin would have become, given enough time and enough sessions in that lounge with a young woman and a potted plant, and an old man sitting on the floor doing what he could. I do not have a data set large enough to draw conclusions. What I have is the log, and the frequency drift, and the fact that every time I calibrated the array for the next session, I was calibrating it to a target that Carlin had moved to on its own. I filed this as a footnote in my final technical report. It is on record. I do not know if anyone has read it carefully. I am including it here because this is the document that will outlast the footnotes, and because it is the part of the story I think about most. We did not save Carlin, we did not fix it, we did not heal it. It was healing itself. All it needed was enough time, and enough reason, and enough human beings willing to sit on the floor of a burning station and hold out a hand. There is a lesson in that. I am probably not the right person to say what it is. I was the one who built the fire. I have been asked, by more than one person in the years since the inquiry, what I felt in those last minutes on the observation deck. Whether I was afraid, whether I was angry at Fritz, at the station, at myself, whether the sight of Waldmann station burning made me grieve. The honest answer is that I felt all of those things, and that none of them were the loudest thing. The loudest thing, the thing that has stayed with me through 3 years of testimony and exile and quiet consulting work in offices that are not mine, was something I can only describe as recognition. Standing on that observation deck, in the firelight and the starrise, watching Carlin face a planet it had never been designed to reach, I recognized something about the creature that I had not, in 4 years of building it, considered. It was lonely. This is not a clinical observation. The neural lattice maps do not have a marker for loneliness. The behavioral logs from the 9 days in Section 4C do not describe loneliness in any language the Directorate's report templates provide for. What I mean when I say it is that I looked at Carlin standing at the window of a burning station, pressing itself against the one surface that showed it the outside of the world it had been alive in for 9 days, and I understood, not as a researcher but as a person, that it was looking out because there was nothing inside worth looking at. Not nothing, Maria, the lounge, the plant. Those 9 days had made something real, something worth having, but outside was the whole universe, and Carlin would not be going there. Carlin had been alive for 9 days and had spent most of them sealed in a section of a research station, learning words one at a time, tending a borrowed plant in a window, watching 2 human beings who were doing their best and who could not give it what it most fundamentally lacked, a world to belong to. I had built it without asking whether there was a place for it. I had created a life, and then assumed the life would fit into the space available. This is the error that I think about when I am not thinking about the neural template and the frequency drift, and the particular quality of the light in Section 4C on the 5th day of those sessions, when Carlin first combined 2 words into a phrase. The error is not the aggression template. Fritz's mistake gave Carlin a harder mind than I had intended. It did not make Carlin a monster. The error is that I made Carlin without first answering the question, every act of creation requires. What world am I making this for? I had an answer for every technical question. I had specifications and models and calibration data. I did not have an answer for that one. The xenobiology community has produced, in the 3 years since Waldmann station, 4 papers on the ethical framework for biosynthetic life creation. I have read all of them. 2 cite my work technically, in the way that researchers cite the studies that produced results requiring extensive correction. I do not begrudge this. The papers are good. They ask better questions than I asked. They still do not fully answer the question of place. Where does a new kind of being belong? What world do you build before you build the life that will need it? These are not scientific questions, exactly. They are the questions that come after the science, in the space where the science does not reach. I spent my career in the space where the science reaches. I am learning late to think about the space beyond it. The Inquiry Board's final report listed 37 findings. Finding number 22, buried in a section on laboratory protocol, noted that the creation of a biosynthetic entity of demonstrated cognitive complexity, without a corresponding life placement plan, represented a significant gap in the Directorate's ethical framework, and recommended that future research proposals in this category be required to address the question of long-term entity habitat prior to funding authorization. It is one sentence in a 30-page document. I consider it the most important thing written in my name, though my name does not appear in it. Carlin has a habitat now. Ilara ensured it. She has never in 3 years spoken to me directly about what happened on Waldmann station, but she has also not stopped working. The research station she arranged is small and quiet and has a pressurized garden and adequate electromagnetic shielding and a young atmospheric monitoring technician who chose to be there. It is not a world. It is a beginning. Whether it is enough, whether anything we can offer now, after everything we failed to offer then, is enough, I genuinely do not know. I suspect only Carlin knows. I suspect Carlin is, in its patient and methodical way, working toward its own answer, remodeling the architecture of its understanding the way it remodeled its neural lattice. Quietly, below the threshold of instruments, incrementally, in the direction of something more stable. I hope I am right about that. I hope I am given long enough to find out. The star was still rising when we cleared Waldmann Station's debris field. I watched it through the rear port of the survey craft, growing smaller behind us, a scatter of metal and light, burning quietly against the dark, the wreck of 4 years of work and one very large and very specific mistake. It would eventually decay into a lower orbit. The Directorate would send a salvage team. Most of the data would be recovered. Most of my research, the parts of it that were genuinely useful, would survive in archives, stripped of my name. This is as it should be. Carlin looked back too, for a moment, before returning its attention to the stars ahead. I don't know what it thought of the burning station. I don't know if it understood what Waldmann had been, or what it meant that Waldmann was ending, or whether the 9 days it had spent alive inside those corridors constituted anything a philosopher would call memory in the full sense. I know it looked back, and then it looked forward. And I thought, yes, that is exactly the right order in which to do those things. I have been working on it ever since.